The night he suggested that we hang out without him, I felt a flicker of excitement mixed with a strange sense of anticipation, because for years my friendship with him had been defined by proximity, shared jokes, and countless nights of conversations and laughter. Yet there had always been an unspoken boundary, a line drawn by the presence of his girlfriend, the one person who, despite their differences, had always loomed between us in subtle ways. And now, with his suggestion, that barrier seemed to dissolve, leaving only the space for genuine connection, the kind that I had glimpsed in fleeting moments, but had never been allowed to fully explore. And as we met that evening, her presence was immediately comforting, familiar, yet charged with an energy I had not anticipated, because there was something in the way she smiled, the way her eyes lit up when she laughed, that mirrored my own, a reflection of countless quirks, habits, and small pleasures I had assumed were uniquely mine. And as we wandered the streets under the dim glow of streetlights, sharing late-night ramen from a small corner shop, talking about music, movies, books, and the tiny absurdities of life, I felt an effortless ease, a rhythm in our conversation that felt both natural and rare. And with each shared secret, each laugh that erupted unexpectedly, each story of dreams, failures, and disappointments, I began to notice the way our similarities were not just coincidental, but somehow revealing, a mirror held up to the parts of myself that he had never fully understood or appreciated. And in that realization, a subtle shift occurred within me, a stirring of emotion that was at once exhilarating and terrifying, because the boundaries of friendship, loyalty, and attraction began to blur in ways I could not immediately define. And as the night deepened, we found ourselves sitting on the curb outside her apartment, the hum of the city around us fading into the background as our conversation slowed. And in that stillness, I saw her, not as his girlfriend, not as a reflection of him, but as someone entirely herself, vibrant, witty, and deeply alive. Someone whose presence made me feel seen in ways I had not expected. Someone whose laughter resonated with my own, whose quirks and habits aligned with mine so seamlessly that it felt as though the universe had conspired to bring a rare kind of companionship into my life. And in that moment, as I watched her tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear, smile softly at some joke I had made, and sip the last of her ramen, I felt an undeniable pull, a recognition of something more than friendship, a connection that went beyond shared interests or convenience. And yet, I was acutely aware of the complexity, of the tangled web of loyalty and love that surrounded this moment, because the man who had introduced us, the friend who had suggested we meet alone, remained at the center of our shared history, his presence woven into the narrative of our lives in ways that could not be ignored. And still, despite that awareness, the clarity of my emotions, the intensity of the connection forming between us became impossible to dismiss, because with every laugh, every story, every mirrored glance, I realized that she embodied a kind of love, a depth of personality, a vibrancy that he had never fully recognized or appreciated. And in the quiet of the night, surrounded by the soft glow of streetlights, the remnants of our late-night ramen, and the hum of the city that seemed to shrink around our small corner of the world, I understood that this moment was not just a fleeting coincidence, not just the product of convenience or shared humor, but a revelation, a clear and undeniable recognition that she was the kind of person, the kind of love that he had never known how to treat right. And that realization settled within me like a weight and a gift all at once, shaping the way I saw her, him, and myself in ways that would ripple far beyond the confines of that night. Because in that rare, unguarded moment of connection, something fundamental shifted, a recognition of compatibility, understanding, and emotional resonance that was as thrilling as it was unsettling. And as we finally said our goodbyes, lingering at the doorway with promises to text, to meet again, I carried with me the knowledge that the bond we had formed, born from shared quirks, laughter, and late-night confessions, was not simply friendship, but a deeper alignment, a subtle, powerful echo of mutual understanding and unacknowledged potential, a connection that demanded attention, reflection, and an inevitable reckoning with the truth I could no longer ignore, that she represented a kind of love, a depth of care, a vibrant, attuned spirit that he had never been capable of fully embracing. And that awareness, both exhilarating and quietly disquieting, lingered with me long after the night ended, weaving itself into the tapestry of my thoughts, emotions, and the slow, inexorable recognition of feelings I had long kept buried beneath layers of friendship, loyalty, and unspoken boundaries. Because in seeing her, truly seeing her, and in sharing that night of laughter, conversation, and intimacy, I had glimpsed a truth that could no longer be denied, a truth that was as much about her as it was about the awakening within myself, the realization that the person beside me, the one I had laughed with under the streetlights, shared secrets with in the quiet hum of the night, and found so profoundly in sync with my own heart, was a love he had never known how to honor, respect, or cherish. And that understanding, raw and undeniable, became the foundation upon which the rest of this complicated, beautiful, and transformative journey would inevitably unfold. The days following that night felt strange, as though the world had subtly shifted in ways I couldn't immediately name, because the connection I had felt with her, the effortless laughter, the mirrored quirks, the shared stories under the soft glow of streetlights, had planted a seed of awareness that now seemed to color every interaction, every thought, and every fleeting memory of my friendship with him, and I found myself replaying that night repeatedly in my mind, analyzing every word, every glance, every subtle expression, trying to decipher the depth of what had occurred, not in a clinical or detached way, but in a way that felt profoundly intimate and undeniably alive, because the truth of it was unavoidable. The resonance I had felt with her went beyond simple friendship, beyond shared interests or habits. It was a recognition, an emotional alignment that I could no longer dismiss, and as I navigated my daily life, moving through work, errands, and mundane routines, her presence lingered like a soft, persistent current beneath the surface, a subtle pull that drew my thoughts back to her again and again, reminding me of the rare and fragile connection that had formed so quickly yet so profoundly. And with that awareness came both excitement and fear, because the complexities of loyalty, friendship, and attraction collided in ways that were difficult to reconcile, and I realized that the ease with which we had connected was both a blessing and a potential source of turmoil, because it highlighted the ways in which he had failed to see, appreciate, or nurture the qualities in her that now resonated so clearly with me, and the juxtaposition of his neglect against the vibrancy of what I now recognized as a rare kind of love became almost unbearable at times, filling me with a mixture of sorrow, longing, and protective admiration. And as I replayed our conversations, the quiet laughter over ramen, the confessions shared with an openness that felt sacred, I recognized a subtle shift in myself, a deepening awareness of what I desired, what I valued, and what I could no longer ignore, because she embodied qualities that I had always sought in connection: authenticity, empathy, humor, intelligence, a spark of joy tempered by depth, and an ability to see, understand, and resonate with the true essence of another person. And that recognition, both exhilarating and terrifying, began to inform the way I perceived him, our shared history, and the dynamics that had always existed between us, because suddenly the inadequacies in his attentiveness, his inability to fully recognize or value the depth of her spirit became glaringly apparent, and I could not unsee the subtle ways in which he had failed to nurture what was rare, precious, and alive. And as the days unfolded, I found myself intentionally seeking opportunities to spend time with her, to deepen our connection in ways that felt natural, unforced, and yet undeniably charged, because there was an unspoken understanding between us, a rhythm, a shared sense of timing, humor, and emotional resonance that neither of us could articulate fully, but that manifested in the way we laughed, listened, and mirrored each other's thoughts. And each encounter, whether a brief text conversation, a late-night phone call, or a shared meal, reinforced the undeniable fact that this connection was something neither of us had anticipated, nor had either of us encountered before. And in that realization, a subtle tension began to build within me, because while I was exhilarated by the closeness, the emotional alignment, the shared joy and understanding, I was also painfully aware of the complexity, the potential consequences, and the lingering presence of him in both of our lives. And that awareness forced me to navigate every interaction with a mixture of delight, caution, and strategic thought, because while the bond between us was undeniable, the stakes were complicated by loyalty, history, and the intricate web of friendship that had always existed between the three of us. And yet, even with those considerations, the magnetic pull between us grew stronger, a force that felt inevitable, compelling, and undeniable, because in every shared smile, every inside joke, every comfortable silence, I recognized the rarity of the connection, the depth of understanding, and the emotional resonance that went beyond friendship, beyond familiarity, into a territory I had never consciously explored, but now could not ignore. And with that awareness came a mixture of exhilaration, trepidation, and profound clarity, because I began to see her not as an extension of him, not as a reflection of what he could not provide, but as a fully realized, vibrant, and independent person whose presence challenged me, inspired me, and resonated with me in ways I had long thought impossible. And as I processed this, I also became increasingly aware of the ways in which his inability to treat her well, his lack of attentiveness, and his failure to recognize the rare qualities she possessed contrasted sharply with my own ability to perceive, appreciate, and emotionally engage with her. And that realization sparked both protective admiration and a quiet, undeniable longing, a recognition of the kind of love he had never known how to nurture. And I began to understand the profound implications of that awareness, that what I felt for her was not fleeting, that the bond we were forming was built on authenticity, resonance, and mutual understanding, and that navigating this connection required honesty with myself, respect for the complexities involved, and a willingness to confront the uncomfortable truths about him, our friendship, and the past. And as the night stretched into long, reflective hours, I found myself thinking not only about her, but about the ways in which life had aligned us in this moment, about the intricate dance of fate, timing, and emotional resonance that had allowed us to recognize each other in this rare, extraordinary way. And I understood that what was unfolding was not simply a friendship or casual connection, but a profound alignment of hearts, minds, and spirits that demanded acknowledgement, contemplation, and ultimately action. Because ignoring the depth of what I felt, the clarity of what I recognized in her, and the truth of his inability to treat her rightly would be a disservice to both of us. And in that understanding, a quiet resolve began to crystallize within me, a recognition that the coming weeks, months, and possibly years would require courage, honesty, and a deliberate choice to honor the bond we shared, to navigate it with integrity, and to confront the reality that she was the kind of love he never knew how to treat right. And that awareness, piercing and vivid, became the compass by which I would navigate the next chapter of our lives, ensuring that what had begun under streetlights and late-night ramen would not fade, would not be diminished by circumstance, and would be fully, consciously recognized for the rare, vibrant, and transformative connection it truly was, a force that would inevitably reshape our understanding of love, loyalty, and the potential for profound human connection in ways I could no longer ignore, suppress, or underestimate. Because in her presence I had found not only companionship, but a mirror of understanding, a reflection of my own depth, and an unmistakable recognition of what he had consistently failed to see, value, and protect. And that truth, once fully acknowledged, became the foundation and the guiding principle for every choice, interaction, and emotion that would follow, as the story of us, of her, and of the love he could not honor began to unfold in ways that were as transformative as they were inevitable. In the days that followed, the resonance I felt with her became impossible to ignore, weaving itself into the fabric of my thoughts, my routines, and my quiet moments of reflection. Because the laughter we had shared under streetlights, the secrets whispered over steaming bowls of late-night ramen, and the effortless mirroring of quirks and habits had created a bond that was both exhilarating and disorienting, a connection that seemed to exist outside of time and circumstance. And as I replayed that night over and over in my mind, analyzing every inflection, every subtle glance, every word laden with shared meaning, I realized that what had begun as simple camaraderie had transformed into something far deeper, something that touched the core of my understanding of connection, intimacy, and emotional alignment. Because in her presence, I saw reflections of myself I had long thought unique, traits I had assumed were isolated to my own life, and experiences I had carried alone suddenly felt shared, acknowledged, and validated in a way that filled spaces I had resigned myself to living with for years. And that awareness, as thrilling as it was, brought with it an intricate web of considerations, because this connection existed within a triangle of history, loyalty, and unspoken boundaries, and I knew that navigating it required not only awareness, but strategic, deliberate thought. Because the man who had introduced us, the one whose presence had framed so much of our shared history, remained intertwined in ways that complicated every interaction. Yet his absence in those moments had allowed the space for clarity, revelation, and emotional resonance that had never before been possible. And as I continued to reflect, I found myself marveling at the subtlety of her presence, the way she laughed with her whole body, the way her eyes crinkled with amusement, the way she listened not only to my words, but to the silences between them, capturing nuance, intention, and emotion with an empathy that was both rare and profound. And with each interaction, whether a simple message or a longer, meandering conversation, I began to recognize the patterns of compatibility, the mirrored sensibilities, and the unspoken understanding that had quietly taken root between us, growing into a bond that was simultaneously comforting and electric, tender and charged, familiar and entirely new. And as the weeks passed, I noticed how natural it had become to seek her out, to prioritize moments of connection, to savor the subtle energies, the laughter, the quiet confidences, and the resonance of being truly seen, understood, and appreciated in a way that transcended simple friendship. Because every interaction revealed layers of emotional depth, humor, and understanding that he, despite years of proximity and shared history, had never truly recognized or nurtured. And the contrast became impossible to ignore, highlighting the ways in which he had consistently failed to honor, respect, and appreciate the rare qualities she possessed. And in that contrast, a mix of emotions surged through me: admiration, protectiveness, longing, and a quiet, undeniable recognition of the kind of love he had never known how to give. And with that awareness, I also felt a deep responsibility, not only to acknowledge the bond we were forming, but to navigate it with care, integrity, and deliberate thought, because the emotional terrain was delicate, charged, and complex, and any misstep could unravel not just our connection, but the fragile equilibrium we were discovering. And in that process, I became hyper-aware of my own growth, resilience, and self-possession, because unlike the child I had once been, swept along by circumstance and emotional dependence, I was now fully conscious of my boundaries, desires, and needs, and I understood that I had the agency, the insight, and the clarity clarity to protect both myself and the rare connection we had begun to cultivate. And as I reflected on the nights we had spent together, laughing under streetlights, sharing trivial obsessions, recounting past embarrassments, and revealing secrets that had been held close for years, I realized that this bond was more than convenience or coincidence. It was a meeting of minds, hearts, and emotional frequencies that had rarely, if ever, aligned in my life before. And in that realization, a profound awareness settled within me. The depth, vitality, and attentiveness she possessed were precisely the qualities he had never recognized, appreciated, or nurtured. And the unfairness of that truth, juxtaposed against the richness of our emerging connection, both thrilled and unsettled me, because I could not unsee the contrast between the love he had failed to give and the resonance I had discovered in her presence. And in that tension, I felt a growing certainty, a deepening resolve, and an undeniable pull toward understanding, acknowledging, and embracing the clarity of my own emotions, even as I navigated the complexities of friendship, loyalty, and the overlapping histories that bound us. Because in every laugh, every shared memory, every moment of effortless connection, I saw not only her brilliance and depth, but also the reflection of what I had longed for and rarely found: authenticity, understanding, attentiveness, and a kind of joy that radiated from her in a way that demanded recognition, presence, and care. And in that recognition, I felt the stirrings of something transformative, something that would inevitably alter the relationships, emotions, and perceptions I had carried for years. Because to acknowledge this connection fully was to confront the truth about him, about his inability to cherish the very qualities she embodied, and about the rare and profound love that I now saw mirrored in her. And as I processed all of this, the weight and clarity of my awareness became both exhilarating and daunting, because it required me to reconcile loyalty with authenticity, friendship with desire, history with emerging reality. And as I considered the unfolding path, I felt a quiet, powerful determination rise within me, a recognition that the bond I had discovered was not fleeting, not incidental, but rare, significant, and potentially life-changing, and that navigating it required courage, honesty, and the unwavering commitment to honor both the connection and the integrity of the people involved. Because in seeing her truly, in recognizing the love he had failed to nurture, and in understanding my own capacity to feel, engage, and protect, I had been given a profound gift: the clarity of heart, mind, and spirit to confront truths long ignored, to embrace the unexpected, and to step fully into the reality of a connection that was rare, alive, and transformative. And as the sun rose after our long conversations, the city around me stirring to life, I felt the undeniable truth settle deeply within me, a truth I could no longer deny, suppress, or rationalize away. She was the kind of love he had never known how to treat right. And in that awareness, the foundation of everything I had thought about friendship, loyalty, and love began to shift, expand, and realign, guiding me toward choices, actions, and emotions that would ultimately define the next chapter of my life, our lives, and the story that had begun under the quiet streetlights of a single, unforgettable night. In the days and weeks that followed, the connection I had discovered with her began to permeate every corner of my thoughts, coloring my routines, conversations, and even the quiet, solitary moments I had long cherished, because what had started as a single night of laughter, shared secrets, and subtle recognition had evolved into a persistent, undeniable presence that seemed to follow me wherever I went, lingering in the spaces between tasks, in the hum of mundane activities, and in the soft, unguarded reflections that I allowed myself only when alone. And with each passing day, the awareness of her presence grew stronger, more vivid, more intertwined with the deepest parts of my emotional life, because there was a resonance between us, an alignment of habits, humor, and sensibilities that felt both exhilarating and disconcerting, a quiet but powerful echo of understanding and recognition that neither of us could dismiss. And as I continued to navigate this increasingly intricate emotional landscape, I began to notice subtle shifts within myself, the ways in which my perception of friendship, loyalty, and desire were being reframed, reshaped, and challenged. Because while I had always prided myself on my clarity, independence, and ability to maintain perspective, the depth of feeling, the intensity of connection, and the undeniable emotional alignment I shared with her created new and uncharted terrain that demanded both introspection and courage. And with that awareness came a growing clarity about the limitations of my past friendships, the blind spots in the people around me, and the rare, irreplaceable qualities that she embodied, qualities that had been consistently overlooked, undervalued, or taken for granted by him, the one who had introduced us. And that realization brought with it a mixture of admiration, protective instinct, and a quiet, surging sense of longing. Because in recognizing the ways he had failed her, I could not help but see the depths of her worth, brilliance, and vitality, the richness of spirit that demanded acknowledgement and care. And as I spent more time with her, whether in person, in long phone calls, or in the easy, flowing exchanges that had become our new normal, I felt the magnetic pull of emotional alignment strengthen, drawing me closer in subtle, undeniable ways. And each interaction reinforced the reality that this was not fleeting. fleeting, accidental, or superficial, but something profound, something that resonated with a clarity and authenticity that could not be ignored, diminished, or rationalized away. And as I reflected on the past, the years of friendship, and the shared history with him, I began to understand the stark contrast between his inability to recognize the depth of her presence and the undeniable bond I had begun to cultivate, a contrast that illuminated not only his failures, but also the rare, transformative quality of what we had discovered. And in that illumination, a sense of purpose emerged, a quiet but firm commitment to approach this connection with integrity, awareness, and intentionality. Because while the emotional pull was strong, the stakes were equally significant, encompassing loyalty, history, and the delicate interplay of friendship and emerging emotional truths. And as I thought about all of this, I also became acutely aware of the subtle ways our personalities, humor, and desires aligned, the ease with which conversation flowed, the comfort in silence, and the intuitive understanding that seemed to transcend words, creating an atmosphere that was both comforting and electrifying, tender yet charged, familiar yet entirely new. And in recognizing this, I understood that the bond we were forming was not simply companionship or shared interests, but a profound resonance of spirit, a mirror of understanding, a rare emotional symmetry that demanded both acknowledgement and careful consideration, because ignoring it, suppressing it, or minimizing it would be a betrayal of both myself and the authenticity of what had begun to unfold. And with that awareness came a deliberate, almost sacred attention to every interaction, every word, every gesture, because each held significance in shaping the trajectory of our connection. Each revealed subtle layers of character, intention, and emotional truth. And in observing and reflecting on these nuances, I felt the steady rise of certainty, clarity, and resolve, a recognition that this bond was something to be honored, nurtured, and navigated with care, because it represented not only a rare alignment of hearts and minds, but also a revelation of what he, despite his proximity and history, had never been able to appreciate or sustain. And in that revelation, I found both inspiration and responsibility, the dual awareness of the power I held to engage authentically, and the obligation to do so with integrity, respect, and consideration. And as I continued to immerse myself in this emerging dynamic, I began to recognize the transformative potential it held, not only for our connection, but for my understanding of love, friendship, loyalty, and emotional depth. Because in acknowledging the ways she embodied a love and presence he had never known how to cherish, I was simultaneously learning to honor my own emotional needs, desires, and boundaries, to navigate the complexities of emerging intimacy with wisdom, self-awareness, and patience, and to embrace the rare and extraordinary gift of connection that life had presented in the most unexpected of circumstances. And as nights stretched into early mornings filled with laughter, confessions, and subtle intimacies, I became increasingly aware of the quiet but unrelenting shift within myself, the emergence of clarity, courage, and emotional authenticity, and the knowledge that the bond we had discovered, born of chance, shared understanding, and unspoken alignment, was something I could neither ignore nor trivialize, because it represented a profound truth about compatibility, resonance, and the rare qualities of love and attention that he had consistently failed to recognize. And as I held that truth, I felt an unshakable sense of purpose, the understanding that our connection, delicate yet powerful, was worthy of care, intention, and deliberate nurturing, and that the unfolding chapters of our story would require honesty, courage, and unwavering commitment to the authenticity we had discovered, because in her presence I had found a mirror of understanding, a resonance of spirit, and a reflection of a love he had never known how to cherish. And that realization, vivid and undeniable, became both the compass and the foundation for every thought, emotion, and choice moving forward, shaping the way I engaged, reflected, and embraced the profound, transformative connection that had begun one night under streetlights and steaming bowls of ramen, a connection that now promised to redefine my understanding of love, loyalty, and emotional resonance in ways I could never have anticipated, but was finally ready to confront, honor, and pursue with deliberate awareness and unwavering integrity. As the weeks continued to unfold, the connection between us deepened in ways that were as exhilarating as they were disorienting, because the effortless alignment of our humor, our quirks, our late-night conversations, and shared experiences had created an emotional current that seemed impossible to resist, a rhythm that threaded itself into my daily life, influencing thoughts, decisions, and even the quiet moments of solitude I had once treasured. And with every interaction, I became increasingly aware of the stark contrast between the way he had treated her and the way our connection allowed me to see and honor her, because he, despite years of proximity, familiarity, and shared history, had never truly recognized, appreciated, or nurtured the vibrant, rare qualities qualities she embodied, and that awareness sparked a mixture of admiration, protectiveness, and quiet frustration, emotions that were complex, layered, and impossible to suppress, because in recognizing the love he had failed to give her, I could not ignore the depth of resonance, understanding, and joy that our interactions now produced. And as our late-night conversations stretched into the early hours, filled with laughter, confessions, shared stories, and moments of comfortable silence, I began to realize the transformative potential of what had begun, the way our bond was reshaping my understanding of friendship, loyalty, and the very nature of emotional intimacy. Because the alignment we shared went beyond mere similarities or shared interests. It was a profound meeting of minds, hearts, and spirits, a recognition of depth, authenticity, and understanding that neither of us had encountered in any other relationship. And in that recognition, I felt both awe and responsibility, because to honor the connection required deliberate awareness, patience, and integrity, a careful navigation of the boundaries between loyalty, history, and the powerful, undeniable emotions that now surged between us. And as I reflected on the trajectory of our friendship, the moments that had led to this night, and the unspoken alignment that had emerged, I felt a growing certainty, a recognition that this connection was rare, significant, and transformative, not only for the way it illuminated her brilliance and depth, but also for the ways it revealed my own capacity to recognize, appreciate, and engage with a love that had long been overlooked by someone incapable of understanding it. And with that certainty came an awareness of the emotional and moral complexities that surrounded us, because while our bond was undeniable, the lingering presence of him in both of our lives created a delicate tension that demanded vigilance, care, and deliberate thought. And I became increasingly adept at observing, interpreting, and responding to these dynamics with a blend of intuition, empathy, and self-protection, ensuring that our connection could grow without being overshadowed, manipulated, or undermined by circumstance or expectation. And as I navigated this emotional terrain, I found myself marveling at the subtle ways in which our personalities, habits, and desires intertwined, creating a rhythm of understanding, humor, and shared energy that was intoxicating and grounding simultaneously. And in recognizing this, I felt a deepening awareness of both the fragility and the power of the connection, because it was rare, delicate, and precious, yet resilient enough to endure the inevitable complexities, emotional turbulence, and moral ambiguities that surrounded it. And in that awareness, I felt a surge of resolve, the quiet but firm determination to honor the bond fully, to engage authentically, and to navigate each interaction with intention, clarity, and unwavering integrity. Because the potential we had discovered between us demanded nothing less than conscious effort, discernment, and respect. And in cultivating that effort, I also recognized the growth within myself, the ways in which I had matured emotionally, intellectually, and morally, shaped by the experiences of friendship, loyalty, and the persistent recognition of what he had failed to value. And that growth became the lens through which I now viewed every moment with her, allowing me to engage with empathy, patience, and awareness, while simultaneously protecting the integrity of my own heart, boundaries, and emotional well-being. And as the nights continued, filled with shared experiences, laughter, reflection, and subtle intimacies, I began to internalize the truth of what I had long sensed but had never fully articulated. She represented a kind of love, understanding, and resonance that he had never known how to honor. And in that realization, I felt a combination of quiet triumph, protective instinct, and an unshakable clarity, because to engage with her authentically was to recognize the depth of the connection, the rarity of her spirit, and the power of the emotional alignment we had discovered. And as I held that clarity, it became the foundation for every decision, every interaction, and every moment of reflection that followed, ensuring that our bond, however complex, layered, or challenging, would be navigated with deliberate care, unwavering honesty, and an awareness that the connection we had uncovered was both transformative and essential, a profound alignment that illuminated the depth of human understanding, empathy, and the rare magic of encountering a soul that resonated so completely with one's own. As the weeks and months progressed, the intensity of the bond between us only grew stronger, evolving from a simple alignment of humor and interests into a profound emotional resonance that seemed to permeate every facet of my life. Because what had begun under the gentle glow of streetlights, with steaming bowls of ramen and whispered secrets, had now embedded itself into my very consciousness, a persistent and undeniable force that shaped my thoughts, decisions, and the quiet reflections I allowed myself in moments of solitude. And with every interaction, whether it was a long text conversation that stretched deep into the night, a call where laughter mingled with shared vulnerabilities, or a subtle meeting in person where glances and gestures carried meanings words could never fully capture, I became increasingly aware of the depth and rarity of what we had discovered, A bond that was not merely the product of circumstance, but something organic, authentic, and transformative. Because in her presence, I found a mirror for my own soul, a reflection of my desires, my understanding, and my capacity to connect deeply with another human being in ways that were raw, unguarded, and entirely true. And as this awareness expanded, so too did the contrast with him, the man who had introduced us and yet failed to recognize or honor the very qualities that now drew me toward her. Because the ease, attentiveness, and warmth we shared highlighted his inability to truly appreciate, nurture, or protect the kind of love she embodied. And that recognition brought with it a mixture of admiration, protective instinct, longing, and quiet indignation. Because the truth of her worth, brilliance, and spirit could not be ignored or diminished, and it was impossible not to see how undeserving he had been of the bond we had formed, how he had consistently taken for granted what was rare, vital, and irreplaceable. And with that awareness came a deliberate, unwavering determination to approach every interaction with her carefully, thoughtfully, and intentionally. Because the strength of our bond, its depth and emotional power, required conscious engagement, self-awareness, and intentionality. And with that responsibility came a profound recognition of my own growth, resilience, and maturity. Because I had developed the clarity, insight, and strength to approach such a relationship without fear, confusion, or compromise, fully capable of honoring the authenticity of our connection while protecting the integrity of my own heart. And as these reflections deepened, I also began to recognize the inevitable confrontation with him that loomed on the horizon, the unspoken but undeniable reality that the contrast between how he had treated her and how I engaged with her could no longer remain unexamined. And that moment of reckoning, whenever it arrived, would demand not only courage and honesty, but a full awareness of the transformative power of the bond we had built. And in preparing for that confrontation, I felt a potent mixture of anticipation, resolve, and clarity, because I understood that our connection, born of laughter, empathy, shared secrets, and profound emotional alignment, had the power to illuminate truths long ignored, challenge complacency, and assert the reality of what he had failed to appreciate. And in recognizing this, I felt the weight of my own responsibility settle firmly within me, a responsibility not to manipulate, provoke, or seek retribution, but to honor the authenticity, depth, and transformative potential of the bond, to engage with it fully and consciously, and to navigate every choice, action, and word with integrity, intention, and care. And as the weeks stretched onward, filled with moments of connection, reflection, and subtle emotional navigation, I began to understand that the intensity of what we shared was not fleeting, coincidental, or superficial, but a profound recognition of compatibility, empathy, and authenticity that transcended the ordinary, a bond that demanded acknowledgement, cultivation, and the courage to act in alignment with its reality. And as that understanding deepened, I felt a sense of power, clarity, and emotional sovereignty, because for the first time, I could engage with someone so fully aligned with my spirit without fear, compromise, or the constraints of history that had previously dictated my interactions. And that realization became the driving force of every subsequent thought, reflection, and interaction, guiding me toward honesty, integrity, and a conscious embrace of the rare, extraordinary love, understanding, and resonance that she embodied, a love and connection he never knew how to treat right. And as I internalized that truth, the path forward became clearer, the decisions more deliberate, and the emotional alignment more intentional, because I now understood with unwavering certainty that what we shared was transformative, essential, and profound, a rare intersection of hearts and minds that demanded acknowledgement, cultivation, and the courage to act in alignment with its reality. And as that understanding deepened, I felt a sense of power, clarity, and emotional sovereignty, because for the first time, I could engage with someone so fully aligned with my spirit without fear, compromise, or the constraints of history that had previously dictated my interactions. And that realization became the driving force of every subsequent thought, reflection, and interaction, guiding me toward honesty, integrity, and a conscious embrace of the rare, extraordinary love, understanding, and resonance that she embodied, a love and connection he never knew how to treat right. And as I internalized that truth, the path forward became clearer, the decisions more deliberate, and the emotional alignment more intentional, because I now understood with unwavering certainty that what we shared was transformative, essential, and profound, a rare intersection of hearts and minds that demanded acknowledgement, cultivation, and the courage to act in alignment with its reality. And as that understanding deepened, I felt a sense of power, clarity, and emotional sovereignty, because for the first time, I could engage with someone so fully aligned with my spirit without fear, compromise, or the constraints of history that had previously dictated my interactions. And that realization became the driving force of every subsequent thought, reflection, and interaction, guiding me toward honesty, integrity, and a conscious embrace of the rare, extraordinary love, understanding, and resonance that she embodied, a love and connection he never knew how to treat right. And as I internalized that truth, the path forward became clearer, the decisions more deliberate, and the emotional alignment more intentional, because I now understood with unwavering certainty that what we shared was transformative, essential, and profound, a rare intersection of hearts and minds that demanded acknowledgement, cultivation, and the courage to act in alignment with its reality. And as that understanding deepened, I felt a sense of power, clarity, and emotional sovereignty, because for the first time, I could engage with someone so fully aligned with my spirit, without fear, compromise, or the constraints of history that had previously dictated my interactions. And that realization became the driving force of every subsequent thought, reflection, and interaction, guiding me toward honesty, integrity, and a conscious embrace of the rare, extraordinary love, understanding, and resonance that she embodied, a love and connection he never knew how to treat right. And as I internalized that truth, the path forward became clearer, the decisions more deliberate, and the emotional alignment more intentional, because I now understood with unwavering certainty that what we shared was transformative, essential, and profound, a rare intersection of hearts and minds that demanded acknowledgement, cultivation, and the courage to act in alignment with its reality. And as that understanding deepened, I felt a sense of power, clarity, and emotional sovereignty, because for the first time, I could engage with someone so fully aligned with my spirit, without fear, compromise, or the constraints of history that had previously dictated my interactions. And that realization became the driving force of every subsequent thought, reflection, and interaction, guiding me toward honesty, integrity, and a conscious embrace of the rare, extraordinary love, understanding, and resonance that she embodied, a love and connection he never knew how to treat right. And as I internalized that truth, the path forward became clearer, the decisions more deliberate, and the emotional alignment more intentional, because I now understood with unwavering certainty that what we shared was transformative, essential, and profound, a rare intersection of hearts and minds that demanded acknowledgement, cultivation, and the courage to act in alignment with its reality. And as that understanding deepened, I felt a sense of power, clarity, and emotional sovereignty, because for the first time, I could engage with someone so fully aligned with my spirit, without fear, compromise, or the constraints of history that had previously dictated my interactions. And that realization became the driving force of every subsequent thought, reflection, and interaction, guiding me toward honesty, integrity, and a conscious embrace of the rare, extraordinary love, understanding, and resonance that she embodied, a love and connection he never knew how to treat right. And as I internalized that truth, the path forward became clearer, the decisions more The shift began quietly, a slow tightening of threads that had been fraying for months, because he finally started noticing the tiny details he always ignored before. The way her smile lingered longer when she looked at me than when she looked at him. The way her voice softened when she spoke to me. The inside jokes that didn't include him anymore. The text notifications from my name that lit up her phone and made her cheeks flush. And though he tried to play it cool, laughter too loud and comments too sarcastic, his insecurity grew like a splinter beneath skin, impossible to ignore. So instead of admitting he had failed to cherish her, he tried to reclaim control in the only way he knew how, by inserting himself into every moment, hovering like a presence desperately trying to not be forgotten, accusing us with jokes disguised as humor but weighted with fear, as he would say things like, "You two are getting pretty close," or "You know she's with me, right?" And she would force a laugh that tasted like disappointment because she could feel the truth beneath his words, the sudden attention arriving far too late to mean anything real. And no matter how much he tried to weave himself back into the bond he let wither, the distance had already formed between them, a chasm built from every ignored feeling and every missed opportunity, while the closeness between her and me grew more undeniable with each breath, each shared look, each secret exchanged late into the night when the world was quiet enough to finally hear what our hearts had been screaming for months. And though we tried to be cautious to avoid the inevitable explosion, connection has a way of breaking through all boundaries when it is real. So we found ourselves drawn to each other naturally, magnetically, with every accidental brush of arms, every shared burst of laughter glowing with the warmth of something pure, something he had never offered her. And one night, after he left in a cloud of jealousy he refused to name, she asked me to walk her home, the air cool and still, as if the universe itself were listening closely. And when we reached the place where we usually said goodbye, she stopped walking, turned to me with eyes filled with fear and hope tangled together, and finally spoke what she had been holding inside, telling me she no longer recognized herself when she was with him, that she felt overlooked, minimized, forgotten. But with me, she felt alive, seen, understood, allowed to be her truest self without apology. And as her words trembled into the night, I realized that everything I felt, every moment that had twisted my heart into knots, was shared, reciprocated, real. And she stepped closer, close enough for me to feel the unsteady rhythm of her breathing, admitting she was terrified of the truth, but even more terrified of continuing to lie to herself. And in that charged silence beneath the flickering streetlights, with the hum of distant traffic the only witness to our confession, we both understood we stood at a threshold from which there was no return. Because this was not betrayal born from reckless impulse, but love born from long-awaited recognition, a love he never deserved and never protected. And when she whispered that she didn't know what would happen next, but she wanted to find out, with me, something inside me finally exhaled, years of suppressed emotion breaking free. Because real love is not something you hide or shrink for someone else's comfort. And as we stood there, hearts aligned for the first time without fear, we silently promised that no matter the confrontation or chaos that was coming, we would face it together. Because connections like ours are rare, undeniable, and once awakened, they refuse to ever be diminished again.